Bill O'Reilly and Russell Simmons debated crime in the black community on O'Reilly's show. Let's watch.
I believe the strife between poor blacks and the police is driven by black crime. That's the nexus point. Do you believe that?
No.
Look, I said on this air that I was disturbed by what happened in the Staten Island case. So did Charles Krauthammer. So did Judge Napolitano. All Americans should be disturbed.
Yeah.
But the bigger issue that you are not acknowledging is that the astronomical crime rate among young black men, violent crime, drives suspicion and hostility on the part of the police who have to be confronted with it. You won't acknowledge it, Russell. You won't acknowledge it.
Let me say this to you. The broken glass laws and the way that the police approach community is a problem. The police are afraid of the community. It's true. And I think that requires some sensitivity training. And that is where we have to start. But if we want to start with the core, if there is crime or prison culture that ensues in the black community, or if the fabric of the black community is in some way disrupted, it has everything to do with your war on drugs. And 95% of the people who go to jail for nonviolent first-time offenses are people of color.
Is selling heroin and crack on the street a violent crime?
What I'm saying is that whites and
That's
blacks
an easy question.
use
Can
and
you
sell drugs
answer
at
that
the same
question?
rate. But
Russell,
95% of the people who are incarcerated
Am
for
I
that
invisible?
crime
Are you not
are
hearing
black
me?
or white,
Are you not hearing me?
Versus white. I don't think selling drugs
Okay,
is
you
a
don't
violent
think so?
crime.
No. So you and I have
And
a
I feel like
fundamental.
drugs-
you and I have a fundamental
I feel like
disagreement because I think selling hard drugs is violent.
I think OxyContin is a hard drug.
Let's go.
I think Vicodin is a hard drug.
Hold it.
I
This
think that
has devastated poor black neighborhoods. In Chicago, there is an epidemic of violence driven by drug gangs. I haven't seen you there.
I think
I haven't
I'm
seen
in Chicago
you
all
there.
the time.
Crime rate is driven by the dissolution of the family. No supervision, okay? Kids with no fathers. The black neighborhoods are devastated by drug gangs who prey upon their own. That's the problem, not the industrial prison complex.
Let's break this down a little bit. O'Reilly says crime in black communities is driven by the dissolution of the family and having no father, which is basically the same thing, and drug gangs. Well, we know that the first one of those isn't true because plenty of kids raised by single mothers turn out just fine, and the ones that do turn out fine simply had material support. So think about it. The President of the United States was raised by a single mother, but the reason he was able to succeed is because he had material support, so he was okay. And then to the next point, well, drug gangs lead to crime. Yes, they do. But how do you solve that problem? Bill O'Reilly's answer is to continue to do what we're doing and fight the drug war, which we know does not work to eliminate the drug gangs. The reality is, and this is the lesson we learned from prohibition of alcohol, if you legalize drugs, the gangs no longer have a monopoly and they would go away. They couldn't exist anymore because they wouldn't be able to compete with CVS or Walgreens or new small businesses that would pop up that would sell marijuana or other drugs. See, that's the thing. It's the inconvenient truth of the situation that O'Reilly would never acknowledge, that we learned this lesson through history in Prohibition. You have to understand, when Prohibition was in place, you know what happened? The mafia got incredibly powerful. Why is that? Because they supplied all the illegal alcohol. So what are the mafia in today's terms? The drug gangs. The drug gangs are the mafia. The second that you legalized alcohol again, the mafia got much less powerful, and they had to change their ways to try to make money in other ways because they couldn't make it anymore from alcohol. The same thing would happen with drug gangs. They would go away if they were put out of business by legalization, the opposite policy of what we're doing right now. Now, here's where crime in the black community really comes from. Systemic economic disenfranchisement. This is another issue O'Reilly would never acknowledge, but it's a fact. We know that it wasn't that long ago. It was just 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where blacks had any chance to make it at all any chance. So think about that, man. That's the lifetime of your father, most of the people listening to me right now. In fact, it's probably the lifespan of some of the people listening right now. You were around when there was open segregation and open discrimination against black people. And what do you expect? The day that the laws passed that got rid of that immediately the attitudes changed of everybody involved in the situation? Wrong. Plenty of people still hold on to those beliefs. Plenty of people today still hold on to those beliefs. So there's no doubt that there's systemic economic disenfranchisement, and we've seen evidence of it in many respects. Like, for example, the resume study. If you have a traditionally sounding African-American name on a resume versus a white name, the African-American name is much less likely to get hired, even if all the work information is the same. So we know that's a factor. That's number one. The second issue which leads to crime: poverty. Now, how do we know that this is the case? Because when you look at white middle-class families versus black middle-class families, the crime rate is the same. So what does that show you? It shows you that when people have an opportunity and when people make it into the middle class, they no longer resort to crime. They only resort to crime because they're in poverty. And when you're in poverty, you get kind of helpless and you got to act out to try to find a way to make ends meet. And sometimes you do immoral things to have that happen. And then also, the war on drugs, which we just went over, that's a huge problem, and that fuels race problems in America because blacks and whites use drugs at the same rate, but black people get arrested 4 to 6 times more often. Simply put, criminal justice system in the United States of America, without a question. The data all lays that out. And then also, another aspect that nobody ever brings up, people are so concerned, O'Reilly's so concerned, conservatives are so concerned about crime in the black community. Well, whenever we bring up even moderate gun reforms, you scream bloody murder and say we can't do that. Well, then don't be mad when the gun statistics and the crime statistics go up every year and we have irrational numbers in the United States of America compared to every other modern industrial nation. We're trying to fix the problem and you're blocking us. Now, O'Reilly is also doing a couple tricks there when he says, is selling drugs a violent crime? He puts Russell Simmons on the spot. Here's how Russell Simmons should have answered. No, of course not. And O'Reilly, he'd go into his little tap dance and give some, smooth rhetorical trick to dupe his silly audience into believing that's not the case. But think about it, it is literally not violent. Somebody they choose of their own free will to come to you and buy a substance, okay? And you are providing. You are the business that is providing. End of conversation. You didn't put a gun to their head. You didn't punch them in the face. You didn't break their legs. You literally did not do violence. So a drug dealer in Harlem is no more of a violent criminal than the CEO of Anheuser-Busch or the maker of the top brand of tequila, or for that matter, the creator of Monster Energy, or the creator of Xanax, or like Russell said, Vicodin and OxyContin. Is your doctor a violent criminal? Of course not. So neither is the drug dealer. And then final thing I'll say is the other trick that O'Reilly uses, it's actually a smooth trick because you didn't see this part because I had to chop it down for purposes of the show, but the conversation started out about Michael Brown and Eric Garner. So the original segment was supposed to be about police abuse of authority. And what did O'Reilly do? A bait and switch. Started out the conversation like that, immediately pivoted to, well, let me explain why the cops are so standoffish, because all these goddamn blacks are such bad criminals and they need to be standoffish and they need to get in their face and they need to be harsh and they need to abuse their authority. So the conversation was about police abuse of authority, which we know exists, we know it's a problem, and the conversation was also about how there's corruption in the prosecutor's office and how the prosecutors never go after the cops because they depend on the cops for their job in every other circumstance. So you're not going to go after your buddies, and we know that they threw the cases because in indictments what you're supposed to do is present only your side, but in the Eric Garner case and the Michael Brown case, they didn't. They went up there and they gave both sides so that the grand jury would be confused and they'd throw out the case. And that's exactly what happened. So the real issue is police racism, police abuse of authority, and corrupt prosecutors. But Bill O'Reilly did a bait and switch, and all of a sudden he made it about, oh, these goddamn blacks are such criminals. Well, it's a goddamn shame that he's so good at his job that he can dupe over his audience on these issues. But I just broke down the reality for you, and this is what you should take away from it.